Welcome back to our Flutter Fundamentals series. In this episode, we're going to be discussing Flutter animations. And by the end of the video, you will know everything that you need to know about creating beautiful animations inside of your Flutter app. So without any further ado, let's begin. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to consult the official documentation. It's actually really good, and it's going to give you a nice foundation of how animations work. So here I am browsing Flutter's official documentation, and the only thing that you need to do is on the left hand side, you can just click on animation and you can learn kind of the fundamentals of animations. So first of all, let's talk about what an animation is. Okay, so an animation is something that moves on the screen, something that moves from an initial position to a final position. Now, this could be something physical. Maybe this is a container that's moving across the screen from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, maybe from top to bottom, or from bottom to top, or from right-hand side to left-hand side. It can also be animation of text. It can also be animation of different colors. So you can animate between, let's say, the color red to, let's say, color blue or something, and display all the intermediate colors. That is really what an animation is. It's kind of a catch-all terms for something that's moving, right? So I'm looking at the screen right now, and there's nothing animating, right? I'm looking at a static image. But if, for instance, I clicked here and then, this thing moved from here to here, that would be an animation. Okay, so now that you kind of understand the fundamentals of what an animation is, and you can easily see that by creating animations, you can make apps come alive and provide important visual feedback to your users. Let's dive deeper and talk about some of the things that you need to understand in order to create animations within your Flutter apps. So the first thing that you need to understand is that you have the foundations, you have the animation class, okay? And this is the base class that you configure in order to animate something. And the most important thing that you need to understand here is really displayed in this little inline video, okay? So we have this animation status, animation value, and then we have opacity. And so if I play this animation, you will see that the value goes from 0 to 1, and then it goes from 1 to 0. And that is because the animation is going forward, and then it's going in the reverse direction. So if I play it, as you can see, animation value is approaching 1, and then it goes back to 0, and then we have the status here, and then we also are animating the opacity, which is something I'm going to show you how you can do a little bit later in the video once we get into code. Okay, so this is like a kind of a basic animation, but it's important to take note that we have the status, we have a value, and then this is something that we're animating, right? And so the object that you're going to be animating is obviously going to be different depending on what you're trying to do. But this is going to be the same, right? The status is, it's either going to be forward or reverse. The value is going to be anywhere from 0 to 1, okay? Now, if you scroll down, you also have something else that you need to understand, and that is the animation controller, okay? An animation controller is a special kind of animation that advances its animation value whenever the device running the application is ready to display a new frame. And what that essentially means is that this is the object that controls the animation. Okay, you have the actual animation that's, animating something, but then you have the controller that controls that animation. And so as an example, here we have a simple video that shows you an animation controller that's using something called curves ease out cubic. And if I play this video, you will see exactly what it means. So if I play it, you see it's accelerating and then it slows down, okay? And then you can see different things being animated, okay? And this is a way to configure animations, right? Most likely the animation that you're thinking about are the animations that are linear, okay? So they would kind of have this line that starts at 0, 0, and then it just goes at the same rate until the end, right? So instead of kind of the slow, you're probably thinking about a line that goes like this, but there are different kinds of animations, right? Depending on your use case, you can animate initially quickly, like a fast animation, and then as it approaches its end, you can slow down. And that's what this ease out cubic means. And obviously there are all kinds of different ones. You can just check out the curves class and see different ways of doing it. And so if you scroll down, another thing that's important to understand are the tweens. Okay, so what is a tween? Okay, so when you think about an animation is really about creating intermediate different steps between the initial point and the ending point. So if I say, okay, let's animate a container and I want to animate from red to green, well, the system is going to figure out that, you know, in order to go from red to green, there's all these intermediate colors in the system, okay? And the way it figures out those intermediate colors and the way it goes from, you know, from zero to the first intermediate color to the second intermediate to the third and so on and so forth, that is a tween. That is a way to create those little animations inside of the main animations. That's what a tween is, okay? And so you can kind of learn more about it. But if we play this video, you will see exactly what I mean. So if I play, you can see this is our animation value. And remember, it's always going to be from 0 to 1. And as we're playing it, we have a tween. This is an in-tween. And so it's going to create these intermediate values from 45 to 65. Okay, here we have a tween double, and that's going to create intermediate values from 100 to 200. And here we have a color tween. And just like how I talked about just now, it's going to create intermediate values from red to green. And this is very, very powerful because the value is typically going to be fixed. It's going to be from 0 to 1, but maybe you need to display numbers, or you need to display colors, or you need to do something else that doesn't fit into that 0-1 kind of time frame, that 0-1 boundary. Then a really good method is to use various tweens. And I'm going to show you an example where we're going to have an app that uses this color tween. And then we also have different animations. We have tween sequences. Okay, so if I play this here, you're going to see a sequence that's being generated, right? We have this one sequence, one color tween from yellow to green. Then we have a constant tween, and then we have from green to red. So essentially, instead of having this one full animation from yellow to red, from this beginning to this end one, we create a sequence and we give them different weights. So this one has a weight of 2, weight of 1, and weight of 2, and that creates a custom animation instead of just having one big animation from, let's say, tween color from yellow color to red color, something like that. Okay, and so that is a quick introduction of the concepts that you need to understand. Okay, there's many more concepts, but in my view, these are the main concepts. You need to understand the status, the value, and then something that you're animating. You also need to understand how you can configure the actual animation. Okay, so you have the object that you're animating, but you also need to configure, well, how are we going to be animating it, right? Is it going to be a linear? Is it going to be, you know, slow in the beginning and then fast, right? So something maybe like this, or is it going to be slow in the beginning and then, or maybe it's going to be fast in the beginning and then slow until the end, right? Kind of what you have here, this ease out cubic, lots and lots of different ways. And we also have tweens that allow us to animate different things in that intermediate area, right? As we are creating, so like from red to green, we can't just switch from red to green. We need to create those intermediate steps, and that's where tweens come into play. Okay. So now that we looked at this, we kind of looked at the fundamentals. Let's jump into code and let's look at some of the examples that will hopefully make you understand all of this a lot better. So here I created a sample Flutter app. And what this app is going to do is it's going to run a different widget in order to show you a different example. So I have several examples here, starting from implicit animation, explicit animation, different tweens, and staggered, and lots of interesting things. Now, the first example I want to show you is the implicit animation. So if we go to this widget right here, this is the code for this widget. And so we have a stateful widget, which means this is a widget that has state attached to it. And what this means is that throughout the time that this widget is running, that this widget is doing something, maybe it's interacting with the users or something like that, this widget is going to be modifying its own state data. And in this case, this is the opacity level. Okay. And so we have a kind of a state variable here. This is double opacity level is 1. And we also have a method here that if you execute this method, you invoke this method, it's simply going to toggle opacity. So this basically checks that if opacity is 0, set it to 1. If it's 1, set it to 0. Very, very simple. And this is here is the meat of the widget. We have our build method. And what we are doing here is we have this app bar and we have this floating action button that invokes this method. But what you want to be paying attention is this right here. This is an animated opacity widget here, and this is an example of an implicit animation. Okay, we're not using a animation controller, we're not using tweens, we're not using anything. This is built into Flutter. This is a widget that comes with Flutter, and there are many widgets that are built in that allow you to animate a certain property. So in this case, this is animate opacity. But if I type animate, as you can see, I have lots and lots of different properties, right? I can animate scale, builder, container, etc., etc. And so there's many things that I can do. I'm just going to leave it on animated opacity. But there's many things that you can, and this is really, really simple and straightforward because you don't really need to use tweens, controllers, and a lot of these other things that we're going to talk about a little bit later. And so this animated opacity takes an opacity argument here, and this is our state variable, and then it also has a duration for the animation. Okay, so it takes the object that's going to be that it's going to be animating, and it's also taking the duration. Okay, so what is the duration of that animation? Is it going to be, a minute? Is it going to be really, really slow, right? Or is it going to be 1 second or even less? And then it has a child widget that's going to be displayed as a child of this animated opacity widget. Okay, and then we have the button that triggers the change in the opacity variable. So let's go ahead and run this real quick to show you what's happening. We're going to run this little app here. All right, so here's our implicit animation demo, and this is the object that we're going to be animating. And so if I click this button, as you can see, it's animating the opacity, and the opacity is essentially the visibility of the object, right? How opaque it is, right? If the opacity is 0, you can't see it. If the opacity is 1, that means you see everything. If it's in between, then you see kind of part of it, right? So if I click this again, it's going to bring it back because this button is toggling the opacity level. And obviously I can kind of change things around, right? I can come back here and I can say, well, I want to do, let's say, 10 seconds. Okay, I can do 10 seconds. I can do 10 milliseconds. Then we can come back to it. And now it's 10 seconds. So it's doing it very, very gradually because it needs to calculate that animation over a 10-second period. And so as you can imagine, we are only doing opacity. And so it's gonna take a while, right? So if I press this back here, you see it kind of appears. It needs to do it within 10 seconds. So it can't do it within a second because the entire amount is 10 seconds, okay? Many other things that we can do, we can change the color, and then it's going to animate it it's going to change the opacity of this child widget. So we have it red. And so it's going to, we have red here, and then it's going to decrease the opacity over a 10-second period. Okay. So that's kind of what we have. And obviously you can configure it. We have duration here, and you can specify milliseconds, right? So I can say milliseconds, and I can say maybe 100 milliseconds. That's 1/10 of a second. So it's going to be 10 times faster than a second. So if I come back here and I do it, you see how quick it is. Look at that. Boom, boom. Just 100 milliseconds. Okay, I can make it 1,000, which is 1 second. Okay, so that's an example of an implicit animation using an animated opacity. Now, in this next example, we're also going to be looking at an implicit animation, but this time we're going to be doing something else. So here we have an animated builder demo. Okay, this is also a stateful widget because we need to contain some kind of state associated with the widget. And in this case, we're going to be using an animation controller. Okay, we're going to be using an animation controller to help us configure this animation. Okay, we're not using tweens. This is still a very, very simple animation. It's just we're going to be using an animation controller coupled with an animated builder. Okay, so first, let me show you what this controller is going to be doing. So we have this animation controller, and in this init state, right? So when the widget is initialized, the state initializes as well. We are initializing this animation controller. And the first thing we're doing is we're saying vsync is this. And this is typically what you're going to be doing when you are initializing a controller. And essentially what that's doing is it's setting vsync as its own class. Because what vsync is a ticker provider, right? And this class has a ticker mix-in. So it has a single ticker provider mix-in. And a ticker is something that fires every time an animation needs to be updated. Okay, so typically you're going to have this vsync, this. You might be doing something else in more complex examples, but for the most part, you're going to have vsync this. Next, we have the duration. Okay, so in this case, we have a duration. Duration is 10 seconds. Okay, and then we tell it what we wanted to do. So in this case, we're saying we just wanted to repeat indefinitely. Okay, we're just saying we just wanted to repeat. We can do other things, right? We can change that and we can say forward. We can say reverse, or we can just say, hey, we just want to repeat this thing indefinitely. And so what we've just done is configured an animation controller. We still haven't done anything with an animation. All we did is configured an animation controller by giving it a ticker, configuring its ticker, and configuring its duration. That's all we did. Now, if we scroll a little bit down, we have something called an animation builder. And what is an animation builder? Well, just like in the previous example, we had an animated opacity, okay? But an animated builder, it's kind of a general widget where you can animate different properties. So whereas with an animated opacity, you can animate just the opacity, right? In this example, you can animate all kinds of different things. So we have this animated builder, that this animated builder takes an animation and a builder. Okay, so the animation, in this case, we're just using the controller. So we specify this animation controller and we give it the view, which is the actual animation on the controller. Okay, so we have this animated controller and the view, and then we have the builder. And here is where we need to specify the widget that we are going to be rebuilding as this animation is executing. Okay, I hope that's clear, right? Because this animated builder, the reason we have it is that if we didn't have it and we just had a regular widget in there, then it wouldn't change, right? It would not change. It would not be rebuilt. But because we have this animated builder and we have this controller, every time this controller is updated, right? Remember, this is a controller where the duration is 10 seconds. So it's going to be updating right in during that duration, right? Depending on how it's configured with the ticker and all that. And so this animation controller is going to notify this animated builder, hey, I just updated, rebuild this thing, okay? And what is it exactly it's going to be rebuilding? Well, it's going to be rebuilding whatever is inside this building. So in this example, this builder returns a widget, and what we are returning here is a transform rotate. We are rotating something, okay? And so this transform rotate takes an angle and takes a child widget, okay? So instead of just returning a child widget, which is something that we could have done, we could have just returned this a container. What we are doing is we are rotating something. We are rotating it, and we're not just rotating it in a static way. We are rotating it by the value in our animation controller. This is very, very important because this animation controller is executing. Well, in this case, it's repeating. So it's going forward and it's going backward. And it has a value. Remember that value from 0 to 1. Okay. And so we're taking this value from that animation controller that is being built by this animated builder, and then we're multiplying it by 2 and we're multiplying it by pi. And that's essentially in order to rotate it 360 degrees. And this is the child that's visible. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this app. I'm going to copy this widget here, put it in my main. I'm going to paste it here, and then we're going to run this app. Okay, and this is the result. And as you can see, this is this child widget that's being rotated using that transform rotate, and by passing to it that that initial animation, that that value that it's being animating. Okay, so as you can see, it's repeating, right? It's repeating and repeating. And obviously you can change some of the parameters, right? So we can go back to this thing here and we can say we want 1. And guess what? That's going to make it faster. So I'm going to do a hot reload. All right. And that's the app reloaded. And as you can see, it's a lot faster because the duration of that animation was decreased. Okay, so it's 1 second. So it has to do it really, really quickly in order to do the whole animation in just 1 second. Okay. Obviously, we could make it longer. We can put, let's say, I don't know, 60 seconds, right? We can do something like this. Okay, now it's very, very slow because that animation, the duration is now 60 seconds. So that means it has 60 seconds to complete that animation. So it's going to be very, very, very slow. Now, in this next example, I want to show you a situation where we are going to be using a tween, more specifically a color tween, in order to create an animation over certain colors. And so here we have color tween example stateful widget. We have the state, and inside the state, we have the animation controller. But this time we also have a tween of color. And remember, you can specify anything that you want. You can make a tween pretty much out of anything, integer, double. But in this case, we are animating from one color to another. And that is why we have a tween of type color. And so we have this init state. And what we're doing here is we're simply creating an animation controller, right? So we have this duration. It's 2 seconds in this case. We have this vsync this, just like in the previous example. And then we're saying repeat, but we're also going to be reversing it as well. And next, we have the actual tween that we're creating. We're creating a color tween. And we're saying this is going to be a color tween that begins at red and ends in green. And this is going to be very, very useful for us because it's going to allow us to animate it from one color to another. Okay, so we have the controller and we have the tween. Now, when we go to the body of this widget, we still have this build method. And here we have the animated builder. And this animated builder allows us to animate over that tween, from beginning to end. And so we're passing this animation, we're passing the controller, right? Because a controller is a type of an animation. Next, we have the builder, and inside the builder, we have a box decoration. And for the color, we are specifying a color tween. We're animating that color tween, and we are casting the result, that value, as color, because this tween is an animation, and the value, it's going to be color because this is a tween of type color. And so we can just cast it as color. And because this whole thing is inside an animated builder, as our controller is executing, this thing is going to be rebuilding. So let me go ahead and run this app so that you guys have an understanding of what's happening. And so here we have an app. And as you can see, it's changing the colors, right? It's going from red to green. So look at that. And it's going back and forth. And the reason for that is we have reverse is true. So it's repeating, it's going, from beginning to end and end to beginning, right? So it's going to be doing that forever, pretty much. From red to green and all those intermediate colors. That's what tweening is, right? It creates those intermediate animations in order to go from, red to green, because otherwise, how would you know how to do that? That's where tweening comes in. That's why tweening is extremely, extremely powerful. And so we can change that around. Let's say you want to go from white to black. We can just reload that right there. And now you're going from black to white or white to black. Okay, using those tweens that are making all of this possible. And obviously we can change the duration as well, make it 10 seconds. And now it's going slower because it has more time to complete that animation from, the beginning to end of that tween that we are animating. Okay, so another really, really powerful way to animate the different properties of your widget. Now, in this next example, I want to show you a slightly different way of animating the UI so that you understand the amount of options that you have at your disposal when it comes to animating different parts of the UI. And so here we have staggered animations, okay? And the way it works is that it's going to animate different parts of an overall widget. Okay, so it's not going to be animating just one part. It's going to be animating one widget and then another widget and then another widget in a sequence. Okay, so let me quickly show you this example so that you understand what exactly it's doing, and then I'm going to show you the code. So as you can see, if I reload this app, it's essentially creating a list, but it's animating them in a sequence. So first it animates this, 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 and that is why it's called staggered animation. There you can see it again. You see how it's doing it. So let's quickly take a look and see how it's done. So we have this main widget called staggered animations. It's also a stateful widget because it needs to contain the list of items. And inside the state, we have a list string of items. So this is a list of items of type string. And now let's take a look at the build method just to kind of understand what's happening. And what we're doing is we're using a list view builder. And this is a named constructor of list view that you're going to be using anytime that you're, generating a list dynamically. Okay, so this is all standard. This list view builder takes an item count and an item builder. So it wants to know in advance how many items are we going to be generating. That way it can optimize it easier. So we say items.length, which is the length of this thing. Next, we have the item builder, and this is an inline function that's going to be generating the actual item. Now, if you were going to do something basic without animations, then here you would just return a specific widget for that specific index. Okay, so maybe it could be a text field, an input field, whatever. But in this case, we are returning an animation configuration staggered list. Okay, and this configures the children's animation to be staggered. Okay, so it takes in a position, and we are passing the position from this list view builder, and it wants the duration. Okay, so it wants the duration of that animation. Here we're passing a duration of 365 milliseconds. So a little bit less than half a second. Half a second would have been 500 milliseconds, just a little bit less. So very, very quick animation. And next we have a slide animation. The child is a slide animation. So we have a vertical offset of 50 pixels. And then another child, the slide animation child, is a fade in animation. Okay, so these children are themselves animating, but what makes the whole magic come together is this animation, this staggered list, because otherwise they would just animate individually. And we don't want them to animate individually. We want them to animate one after another, after another, after another. We don't want them to animate all at the same time. And that's what will happen if you're not using this animation configuration, okay? And so it's important to understand that these are all animations, but this is what makes it all behave so nicely in kind of this staggered fashion. So we have the slide animation, we have a fade in animation, and then we have a card with a margin, elevation, some styling, and finally we have the child, which is a list tile. Okay, and this list tile has a title, which is the item in this index. So it's going to be one of these strings here, and then it has a leading, right, circle avatar, and that has a child, which is just the index. Okay, and so if we take a look at this, we have the actual item, and this is the leading here, right? This is the circle avatar, and the child is the actual number. Okay, and so if you were just gonna do this list builder, you would simply return this thing here, right? This just this list title you would inside this item builder. Okay, just as simple as that. So if I delete all of this, right? So let's say I delete all of this here, and I remove that, and I just place this list tile right here, okay, and I reload it, this is what I'm seeing, right? I'm just seeing the items. But because we're doing a lot of interesting things, right, inside of it, right, we have all this machinery here. All of this is making sure that not only it's animating individually, but it's also animating in a staggered fashion. And this is the power of Flutter, is that you can build a very, very complicated UI, a very, very intricate and kind of comprehensive UI that animates, separately, and then kind of animates all as one. You can, you can design it all together, and it can all work really, really nicely together. This is really the power of Flutter. And obviously you can take this further. You can create other interesting animations. You can stagger different animations. It's really up to you how far you want to take. And so this concludes our tutorial on Flutter animations. I really hope you've gotten value here. Now, if you enjoyed this video, definitely like this video, comment below, and subscribe to this channel. And definitely make sure you are subscribed, because I plan to upload many more comprehensive Flutter tutorials that you need to know in order to build amazing apps. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll talk to you in a future video.